Hello everyone, welcome to another Garden City Arts online program. Today we are painting that beautiful summer painting that you see in the left hand side of your screen. And I'm going to be walking you through this painting step by step. Now a few basic tips and tricks before we get started. If you purchased an art kit from Garden City Arts, then all of your colors are pre-mixed and ready to go. You need to lay them out on your foam plate in the order that you see them, okay? And you want to make sure that you have some brushes handy. The bigger the brush, the better for this painting. So if you have a large 1-inch wash brush, perfect. If you don't have a brush that big, that's okay. You could get away with like a 1/2-inch brush. I wouldn't suggest trying to get away with anything smaller than that. You do need one big brush for this painting. Other brushes that you will need include a round brush and maybe a shader brush, okay? So these brushes can be quite small. I'm using a size 4 on both the round and the shader. You could use bigger or smaller and be just fine. So make sure you have your chalk, your water, your paper towel handy, and you are ready to get started. So we're going to work from back to front today, and we're going to be doing a lot of painting to get started with, and then we'll kind of big open areas, and then we'll get more detailed and smaller as we move forward in the painting, okay? So big swatches of color. Don't stress too much if your blending isn't perfect at the beginning, and then kind of towards the end, that's when we'll become more detailed, tighter, and a little bit more controlled. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to just lay my color palette off to the side, and you will want to grab your biggest brush, whatever it is, and you will want to prime it by dipping it in paint water and then patting it dry on your paper towel, okay? So the goal is not to have a dripping wet brush, it's to have a nice damp, cool brush that's a little bit easier to manipulate the paint with. Now, I'm gonna be using a lot of paint. Don't worry about keeping your paintbrush dainty. So I'm gonna grab a good chunk because we wanna start with a lot of paint, and then we'll, like I said, get more detailed as we go. Now, if your paint is a little bit dry, take your paintbrush and mix some water into your paint to make it a little bit more fluid. We're starting off with this yellow, and this yellow, it is gonna be a bit transparent. Okay, so you might have to do 2 layers. That's okay, no stress. That's why we're starting off with a tan background, so that kind of helps alleviate that issue that comes with using yellow. Now, I'm gonna have my light source be this bright sun in the center, but we're not gonna put it in yet. We do wanna think about the shape of the sun, which is round. There's a bit of a curve. So you're gonna put in a horizon line pretty low to the ground. And I do that by just drawing a line to give myself kind of a good starting point. And then from that starting point, all of my lines are gonna be curved, okay? So as we go up and away, everything curves and mimics this little semicircle shape of the sun that we will put in just a moment. So, like I said, good helping of paint. I want to put in just yellow, and I also wanna do big brush strokes. So if you do short little choppy ones, what happens is that you have a lot of like start and stop lines where you can see indentations in the paint. If you do big brush strokes, you won't have those little telltale signs of what you were doing with your paintbrush. So remember, add water if you need to. And I'm gonna come up to about the halfway point. So basically where I put my horizon line in and the top of the canvas is all gonna be sky. So I'm gonna come up to at least the halfway point of where my sky is. And that's where I'm gonna stop with my yellow. Okay, now I'm gonna swirl, tap, and dry my brush. So when you swirl, tap, and dry, you really get your brush nice and clean. You swirl it in the paint water, you pat it, or tap it, I'm sorry, on the side of the can, and then you pat it dry. I'm going to now start at the top and work my way down. So I'm gonna move from my yellow to my orange. I'm gonna grab my orange paint, and remember, if it's a little dry, just mix some water into it. I'm going to fill up those corners. And again, even though it's orange, it still is heavy on the yellow, so it will still be very transparent. No worries. Again, you can always do a second coat after the first layer dries if you feel the need. But remember, we're gonna put some clouds and some trees and a hammock on this thing, so really, you probably won't need it, and you probably won't notice any uneven patches. Now, I am bringing my orange down, and it is going to meet the yellow. And where it meets the yellow, I'm going to blend. All right, so once you have the top section of your canvas orange and the bottom section is yellow, we need to start thinking about the transition between these two colors. And you'll notice I left kind of a gap between, and I did that on purpose because we want the paint to be really wet, the yellow paint that's there already and the orange paint that's being put on top of it to both be really wet. Wet on wet blending is much easier to do. Now, if you want a darker sky, then you can bring the orange down into the yellow, okay? If you want a lighter sky, then you're gonna bring the yellow up into the orange. So it's really up to you what you choose to do. I'm gonna go a bit dark, so I'm gonna bring the orange down into the yellow. But before I can do that, I'm just going to make sure I'm gonna put on a nice layer of wet yellow paint. Because like I said, it's easier to blend if both colors are nice and wet. They're not dry. So I'm putting down a nice layer of yellow paint that is very wet. This can also serve if you feel like there's some areas that you're not liking how they're drying, because it does change as it dries. You can also, take some extra time and come back in here and do a second layer of paint. That's totally cool too. Okay, now I'm gonna grab my orange. I didn't even bother rinsing my brush because I want these two colors to blend. And I'm gonna go right on top of that line, okay? It's important to go right on top of the line. If you don't move these colors back and forth and allow them to talk to each other and to mix together, nothing's gonna happen. You're just gonna have a very distinct line between the two colors. So I'm bringing my orange down into my yellow, and by going back and forth, do you see how I have a really nice blend with really minimal effort? So now that I have that blend and that transition, and now that once I'm happy with it, I'm not happy with it over there. I'm just gonna work really fast. But once I'm happy with that transition, I can swirl, tap, and dry my brush, and then I can move on. So remember that throughout this entire video, you can, oh no, don't drip water on your painting like I just did. I got messy with my swirl, tap, and dry, and I spilled water all over my painting, which is not good. That creates a slick spot. Basically what's gonna happen is that's gonna create a little spot where it's gonna take all the paint off, or all the wet paint off. So get that water off and then try to fix it as best you can. There we go. Okay, so now that I have a blend and I have a transition from yellow to orange, I'm gonna move on to my sun. You can use a big brush if you want. You could switch to a smaller brush. If you have a 1/2-inch wash brush, it might be easier for you to control if you are just starting out painting. I'm gonna use my 1-inch brush. I'm gonna make sure there's some water mixed into my paint. Notice that when I mix water into my paint, I mixed it on the side of the pile, not in the middle, but on the side. The reason for this is that if you mix it in the middle, nothing really happens. You have to have a lot more water. If you mix it on the side, then the ratio of water to paint is a little bit better. So I'm going to use the top edge of my brush to put in a nice little line. Then I can use the side of my brush to fill in. Now remember, if your paint is dry, add some water to it. The way you know it's dry is if it looks scratchy and it's not applying smooth. If that's what's happening to you, you need more water in your paint, and you might need more paint on your brush. Now, this is up to you what you choose to do. You could keep your sun really small, that's fine, or you can make it a little bit bigger. I'm going for a bit bigger, and I'm also going to blend my edges. So I'm not making a solid sun. If you want to leave it like this, that's okay. You could leave it like that and it's very obvious where the sun ends and the sky begins. If you want more of a transition, what you're going to do is follow my next step. I'm going to take yellow, not cleaning off my brush, and I'm using it only the top edge of the brush. I'm going to come in here and use the top edge to make little lines. And I bring that yellow into my white, and then I bring the white out into the yellow. So I'm going back and forth. I'm letting those colors talk to each other and play with each other. If your canvas is really dry, you might need to put down a base of yellow first before you attempt doing this, before you attempt mixing or transitioning between your yellow and your light yellow. I call this color butter because that's what it reminds me of. It's a light yellow. Basically yellow with tons of white mixed into it. All right, and once you're happy, now if you don't like all those individual lines, you can use the edge of your brush, and do you see how if you go over it with the edge of your brush, it smooths it out a little bit? You can do that if you want to make it look more blended and have it less like distinct lines. Okay, now when you're done with that, you're done with your background. And remember, yeah, there's going to be little areas that you feel like could use touch-ups. I'm looking at mine, I'm going, oof, there's a lot of areas that need touch-ups. Well, go ahead, go back on. Just remember that there is no Control-Alt-Delete. There's no edit undo, okay? You can't go back. So if you over-perfect and keep, looking at one little thing and changing it, one little thing and changing it, you might end up taking a step back after all those changes and going, what did I do? I should have just left it. So know when to stop, okay? Also know that this is the background. It doesn't have to look perfect at this point. It's the background. It's gonna change. Okay, so I am done with my background for now. And I'm gonna have to let this dry just a little bit, the down the bottom part just a little bit before we can start adding in the ground. But that's actually a good thing because we need to add some clouds. And those clouds are going to be primarily this red and this kind of maroon color. It's basically cadmium red mixed with a little bit of ultramarine blue. We're gonna use, you and I are gonna use those two colors to create our clouds. Now, I'm going to show you really fast how to make a cloud on our foam plate. So, because these clouds are backlit, which means the sun is behind them, we're going to put down a layer of light red first. And do you see I'm using the side edge of my brush? And I'm doing a bunch of like this little tapping. If you want to do some wiggles with your brush, you can do that too. Just make sure that your cloud doesn't turn into a box, okay? Clouds have tumors, clouds are round, they are not boxy. So they can also be really thin lines too. After you have a layer of the light red, then you take a layer of your darker red and you put it on top. Now you don't come all the way out to the edges, not all the time anyway. You go on top of them, top of where you put your other cloud, and you come a little bit out on the edges, but not all the way. And you can do some of this round. I like doing swirls for my clouds. And you darken in the center of the cloud, leaving some of the edges light. That is the technique I want you to use when doing these clouds. I also want you to think about how clouds are transparent. So that means we should be adding some water into our paint. The more water you add to paint, the more transparent or see-through it is, and that's what we want. So I'm adding a whole bunch of water into my paint, and I'm going to start creating some clouds. So let's see. I want to kind of keep with the idea that everything's kind of round and curvy and kind of framing the sun. So I'm going to start kind of down low, not too close to the horizon line, and I'm going to start tapping in some of this cloud, and I want it to kind of be a little bit round like the rest of my painting. Okay, so this looks way better once it's on the canvas, doesn't it? It doesn't look very good on the foam plate. Which makes sense. Foam plates are not meant for painting. Okay, and then I'm gonna put maybe another little baby cloud. Don't feel like your clouds all have to stay on the canvas. They can go off, trail off. I'm gonna put a nice little weird funky looking cloud with a nice little tail. And this guy's gonna be pretty big. I'm gonna make him nice and big. So you'll notice that this red is a bit more of a red-orange, and that's because I mixed a little bit of yellow into it. And so it's gonna really look more like it's a part of the background than this maroon color, and that's good. You want kind of subtle transitions with your clouds. Now I'm gonna come up to my corners, and I'm gonna start putting in some paint in my corners. I don't have to fill in the top edge of the canvas completely. I'm just going to make it a bit darker up there. There's more clouds, there's more leaves from our tree. We want it to be darker than down here. I'm keeping this pretty bright and light, so I'm not adding a ton of clouds. But up on the top of your canvas, it's, you know, free game. Okay, so once you are happy with the first layer of clouds and you're happy with the position that you've put them in, you know, if you need to, you can always add some little knobs and appendages, some tumors to your clouds, whatever you think you need. After you're done with that first layer of the lighter red, kind of the orangey red, you can move into the maroon color. Once again, you want to have some water mixed in because these clouds are transparent, okay? And you want to remember the rule. You don't want it really dark on the edges. This should be primarily for the middle of your cloud and maybe the tops of the cloud. But the bottom edge where the light source is, you want to keep that nice and light. Also, remember that you can jump back and grab a little bit of the orange red and kind of blend it on the edges so it transitions, just like that. Now remember, you can do some wacky swirls. I do a lot of dotting, but you can do some swirling and swiping as well. I might not use a lot of this dark red down at the bottom. Maybe this dark red is primarily for the top where it's darker because it's much lighter down here, right? So save a lot of this dark red for those corners. This maroon, I should call it, really. It's not, it's almost more of a purple than a red. Okay, now you'll notice I'm going fast. That's because if you overthink clouds, they don't turn out so great. If you go fast and you don't really like think about each and every individual brush stroke, it's going to turn out better. You'll probably be happier with it by the end. Okay, so I have my clouds all finished. I could come back in and maybe add a few darker touches every now and then. I could also do the opposite. I could come back in and add some light touches. And once you're happy with your clouds, we can move on. I'm just going to do a few little tiny touch-ups and then I will move on. Remember, at any point you can pause the video, you can move forward. If you're done with your clouds and you're like, gosh, she's taking forever, just fast forward, no stress. Everybody works at their own pace. Okay, so we are done with the sky, okay? From this point on, you have to commit to not touching that sky because it needs time to dry. If you look closely at mine, it is pretty thick with paint. I might have to just take a step back and let this paint dry for a little bit. That's okay, no stress. We can work on the foreground for a little bit, okay? And if you need to, pause that video and take a break, a beverage break, okay? So let's talk really fast about the ground. Let's start getting that in. And then after the sky has time to dry, we can talk about the trees and the hammock. All right, so if you want, you could switch to a smaller brush. I'm going to continue using my 1/2-inch wash brush. And the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the ground. Now, we do live in Kansas and it is flat. Oh no, okay, so don't be like your teacher. Do you see these little tiny black dots that I got in there? Don't do that. Don't accidentally drop black droplets of paint on your canvas. That's a bad discovery, especially if it's dry. If you make a mistake, you can erase, okay? You take a clean, damp brush and you scribble back and forth and it picks the paint up. So that's what I did to get that black off. So that was a good learning moment. Anyways, let's get back to ground. So you could be flat as a pancake like Kansas and just do a solid flat line. I think that's a bit boring. I would rather have some weeds because, you know, Kansas is flat, but we do have a lot of weeds. So I am going to use my brush. I'm going to turn it to its thinnest point and I'm going to use the top edge to make little lines. Now, the lighter you press, the thinner your line. And if you go up and down, you can create some really nice weeds very quickly. Now, the harder I press, the thicker the line. You probably don't want weeds that thick, so try to keep your mark making a little bit thinner. If you're having trouble with that and using the bigger brush, try using the round brush or the shader brush, okay? The up and down might not be as easy to do as it is with a wash brush, a large wash brush, but you'll still get the same thing. And remember, you can always practice on your foam plate if you need to. So I'm going to start right on my horizon line and I'm going to go and do that up and down brush stroke movement. I also want to think about how weeds aren't just straight up and down, right? They curve. So I can turn my brush in my hands as I go. To have all sorts of different directions. Now I did mix quite a bit of water into my paint, and the reason for that is, even though it's making it a bit transparent, it's going to make it easier to work with. If you don't mix water into your paint, it's going to be dry and kind of scratchy and difficult to control. So don't worry, you can always add a second layer of paint, but it is a lot harder to be erasing all these lines that you don't like. And after I am done with my little jagged edge that is now my horizon line, I can go back in and paint everything below my horizon line solid black. So I'm just adding some weeds in some different directions, making some a little bit taller. Make sure that you're not doing this, okay? If you look closely, what I mean by that is that you're not doing weed, space, weed, space, weed, space, okay? If you do that, try to fill it in solid in between, and then try to make some a little bit taller and some a little bit shorter, okay? You don't want it to look like a comb. You want it to look like the ground. Now, we're going to fill that ground in with solid black paint, and when I come up close to my top edge, my horizon line, you might want to stop doing this back and forth motion and go back to this motion, okay? It will make it look more natural. You won't have these weird brush strokes that are just straight across. Okay. Now remember, you can always put a second layer on in a little bit. I wouldn't try to keep going over the same area again and again to cover it up if you feel like it's too light. Basically what will happen is you'll end up overpainting and you'll end up taking paint off rather than putting it on the canvas. So instead, swirl, tap, and dry your brush, give it a moment, take a beverage break, okay, and then come back to it in a little bit. All right, now I have my ground and I have my sky done on my painting. I'm gonna take a quick beverage break myself and I'm gonna let my sky dry. Once it's dry, we can move on to our tree and our hammock. Okay, now that our canvas is nice and dry, we can move on to the silhouettes. So basically this painting is all downhill from here. This was the hardest part of the painting. The silhouettes are pretty easy. So if you bought the art kit from Garden City Arts, then you will have a piece of tracing paper with the image from the original painting in with that kit. So what you want to do, you want to identify the front. The front, do you see these 4 lines coming to one? That should be on the right side of your piece of paper or tracing paper. If you flip it over, it'll now be on the left, and that is the back side. So you take your chalk, you chalk up all of your lines, just go right over the Sharpie lines, and then after you've blown off the dust, shaken it off, you flip it over so that it's back to right side up. The chalk has to touch the canvas in order for this to work. So you lay it in place wherever you want it, hold it, and then you use the back end of one of your paintbrushes to apply pressure. Wherever you apply pressure, it is going to transfer. So the chalk is going to transfer onto your canvas. Press hard, don't be afraid to hurt your canvas. You might go through the tracing paper, but you won't go through your canvas unless you have some serious gums. Serious muscles, sorry. Okay, so I'm gonna pretend like I have transferred all of this information, and then I'm gonna remove this. You will have a faint line left behind. If it's hard to see, before you start painting, go ahead and go back over it with your chalk, okay? Make sure that it's really visible and easy for you to identify before you start painting. Now, if you don't have the tracing paper or you just want to learn how to paint, draw this, no problem. I'm going to show you super fast. Okay, trees are super easy. You start with a thick trunk, and then as you go up, those branches get thinner, but they multiply, okay? So you just get more and more of them. So what I do is I start off with a nice big kind of hourglass looking thing. To cut this trunk into branches, you put a V inside, okay? Then as you branch out more, you put more and more V's, okay? So you just keep going, keep putting V's. If you want your trees to be a little bit more gnarly, you can make them a little bit curvier. I'm afraid that I didn't do a very good job on this gnarliness, but that's okay. And you just keep your branches going until they're off the canvas. Now, the hammock is super easy. It can be confusing, so watch closely. We start with diagonal lines that kind of face each other. Then you want to make sure that those lines all come back to a single point. They need to, I'm not doing a very good job of this, they need to all look like they're pointing to the tree. They can't point away from the tree. So that's bad. Unless they come together at like a point, then that's okay. All right. The good thing is this is our sloppy copy, so if you're not doing it in Sharpie, which you shouldn't be, then you should be doing it in chalk. Then you won't have the issues that I'm having right now. Now, these two corners are going to connect to one corner. So I'm going to bring this and swoop this line and connect it to the corner. Do the same thing. It's going to make a very thin, like pipe or horn looking kind of thing. Then this corner goes down and connects somewhere in the middle, and it'll look like a hammock that is kind of curled. Now, again, you can do a better job than I did. I was going super fast just to demo. Sorry for the bad drawing. Okay, now, if you use the transfer sheet, you are probably just about done transferring, and if you're not, you can always pause the video. But one thing that you'll want to do is continue the trees off the canvas. They don't stop where they stop on here. The transfer paper is just a little bit smaller than our actual canvas, so just make sure that you continue your tree branches up and off the sides and the top of the canvas. I didn't transfer the whole thing, so I can just come back in and kind of dictate where I think those branches should go. Okay. Once you have your image chalked up and ready to go, we're going to start painting. Now, you can use a big brush. If you feel more confident, use the shader or the round brush. Either way, you're going to want to mix some water into your black paint, and then you control how much pressure you put on your brush and how much paint you have on your paintbrush. So if you have a whole bunch, you're going to have a thick line. If you use the top edge of your brush and press lightly, you're going to have a thin line. So use the top edge, press light, and you'll have a thin line. If you press hard, you're going to have a thick, heavy line. Also, if you have a chunky amount of paint, you're going to have a thick, heavy line no matter how light you press. So make sure you have a little bit of paint in your brush, control that amount, and control the amount of pressure. The more water you mix in, yes, the lighter the paint, but it'll also be easier to work with. Now, I'm going to quickly outline, and I'm going to speed up the video at this point and just get everything blocked and solid. I'm going to do the tree branches and the hammock. I am not going to do the leaves yet. So, wherever your tree branches end, stop. Remember, we're going to put some leaves on there, so it's okay if they kind of end in the middle of nowhere and it doesn't make sense. That's okay. So, I'm going to speed up the video, paint all this in, and then once we're done, we'll talk about those leaves. Okay, we are done, or at least I am done because I sped up the video, with the basic silhouettes. Okay, so our basic tree trunks, branches, and the hammock. Now, the leaves, I'm going to show you how to do those really fast. If you are still painting and need just a few more minutes, no stress, pause the video. We will resume whenever you are ready. However, if you're ready to move on, you can grab your shader brush or your 1/2-inch wash brush, whichever you would prefer. I would highly recommend maybe starting with the 1/2-inch wash brush with a big brush and then ending with your shader brush. That way you don't get too big and bulky and you still have some details, but you can go a little bit faster and you don't have to be painstakingly dotting this on. So just like with the clouds, we're going to be doing a whole bunch of dotting motions. Okay, now I'm going to show you really fast what I mean by that. I'm going to use the corner of my big brush and sometimes the flat side edge, and I'm going to dot a whole bunch on. Now, leaves are not solid. Trees are not solid, I should say. There's tons and tons of leaves, and there's tons of little tiny openings and places where it's lighter, other places where it's darker. So you can start with a really transparent layer, just like we did with the clouds, and then you can get a little bit heavier after you've done a few layers. Now, I am going right to the edge of my tree branches. And if you didn't go out very far, you are going to have to extend out. Okay, so go out past where you ended. And again, remember, you can leave quite a bit of space. Let some of that light shine through. And just like clouds, trees are not square. Don't make square clumps, okay? Also, something I've noticed from a lot of my classes that I've taught is that sometimes people are so afraid of going out and away that they end up just doing these little tiny circles on the edges of the branch, on the very ends, and it kind of makes it look like a poodle tree. We don't want poodle trees either. So don't be afraid, go out, it's okay. There's tons of little branches that maybe we just don't see because they're covered up with leaves. Okay, we can justify just about anything with painting. Just make it look how you want it to look. So go off and away from the branches. You can even bring it down a little bit, like onto the branch. I would just recommend that you stay away from the middle of the tree where the branches connect. I would say stay on the top half. That will make it look more tree-like, especially if you are kind of newer to trees. That might help you. Now I'm done with transparent layers. I'm going to start adding some thicker, heavier layers. And I'm only doing that kind of in the middle, just like we did with the clouds. Not on the edges so much, but really kind of in the center, because we're giving them just a little bit more volume, a little bit more weight. Now, doesn't mean that you can't continue bringing the tree branches out if you need to, the leaves. And really, I think leaves should go really fast, just like clouds. You don't overthink them, you throw them in there, and then you are done. Okay, so I'm gonna swirl, tap, and dry my brush. There are things that I could do to touch up. So I could do some another layer on the trees of black paint, so some more details basically. I could probably add some more grass, maybe make it a little bit taller around the trees. You know, there's lots of different things that you can do. If you are an advanced painter, you could even take some of the yellow and some of the black. Oh, my yellow is dry now. Yellow and some of the black, and mix up kind of like a gray, and use that gray to add details to your hammock. So a little line right here for a highlight that edge. Okay, there's lots of different things that you can do. Don't feel like you're done just because I am done showing you how I did the original. This is your painting, so feel free to have fun and be creative. I hope you had a blast. As always, don't forget to sign your work at some point. You can do that with paint or with a Sharpie in a light colored area. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. Maybe see you soon. Thank you for watching this online program. Please help Garden City Arts thank these generous sponsors.